First 11 chapters of Genesis, God dealt with the world as a whole. In the first 11 chapters, we learn about the creation, the fall, the flood, the continued rebellion after the flood when, under Nimrod, they built a Tower of Babel, which was the first really organized governmental rebellion against God. We've had a number since then. And then finally, it's as though God said, and this is the first 2,000 years history of the earth, I'm going to quit dealing with mankind as a whole. I'm going to grab one man named Abraham. I'm going to build a nation out of him. And whatever I have to say, I'm going to say it to him and his descendants. So from the 12th chapter of Genesis on throughout the Old Testament, the focus is on Abraham and the promises God made to Abraham. The promise to make of him a great nation, the promise to give him the land of Canaan, and the promise to bless the world through him. In a larger sense, the whole history of the world is a history of God fulfilling that promise. There's a little bit of a parenthesis called the church age because they were supposed to reach out and touch us. They didn't. So God said, I'll go gather people for myself among the Gentiles. But when the church is complete, we'll be raptured, and God will go back to completing the promises, completely fulfilling the promises he made to Abraham. They've been partially fulfilled, but they will be completely fulfilled, especially during the millennial reign of Christ. And what we're doing now is we're going through a little brief history of Abraham and then his son Isaac and then Jacob and Esau and the family that finally ended up in Egypt. And I know that many of you are familiar with these stories, but others of you aren't. And so what I want to try to do is give a little brief history of each of the major patriarchs. Abraham, first of all, then Isaac, then his son Jacob, and then we'll wrap up with Joseph, the greatest of Jacob's 12 sons. Last week we did a little brief history of Abraham. Abraham was living in Ur of the Chaldees. This is southern Mesopotamia, southern Iraq. God said, leave your country and leave your family and come to Canaan because that's where your blessings are. And so Abraham did leave Ur. And he traveled up the Via Maris, and rather than going down into Canaan, he took a detour to Haran. And not only did he take a detour to Haran, but he took his family with him. But he did leave Ur, so he's partially obedient. It's kind of like us. So let's don't get too self-righteous on this. And if God spoke to him again, says, leave your country and leave your family and go to Canaan, Abraham. That's where the blessings are. And Abraham was obedient. He did finally leave Mesopotamia, and he left most of his family, but he took Lot. He's working. He's getting better. And before he ends, he's going to be an incredibly great man of faith. Then he went to Canaan, and then he went on to southern Canaan and the Negev, and there was a famine, and he left the land of blessings, land of faith in God, to go down to the land of faith in man. Big mistake, but God still saved him. He could have lost his wife Sarah there in Pharaoh's harem, but God stopped that. And so, because he had great plans for Sarah, she was going to be the mother of Isaac and the mother of the nation of Israel. So, God put a stop to that business. He returned to Canaan and then went up into central Canaan. And there he and Lot separated. And then Lot took, as you know, the best land, the land in the water Jordan Valley. But in the end he lost everything because there were some kings from Mesopotamia who came over and conquered more than a dozen of the Canaanite city-states and took the spoils of war from those city-states and the people captive back toward Mesopotamia. Abraham came to his nephew Lot's rescue, and he made an alliance with several of the tribal chieftains actually 3 tribal chieftains in Canaan. They marched up to a place called Dan, which was in northern Canaan, and even though they were clearly outnumbered, they attacked at night, scared the daylights out of the kings and their warriors, and they fled. And so Abraham was able to rescue his nephew Lot and the others who had been taken captive. Now, about 10 years have passed since Abraham left Ur of the Chaldees, or Mesopotamia, and came to Canaan, and he and Sarah still don't have a child. And God says, I'm going to build a great nation for you. Well, you got to start with at least one kid, right? And so they jumped the gun. They still believed God would do it, but I think God gave them just a piece of the information. I think they assumed all along it would be Sarah, but Sarah didn't bear a child, so Sarah said, take my handmaiden Hagar and have a child for me through her. Abraham did. He had a child, Ishmael, which proved to be a disaster. Ishmael became the father of the Arabs, and they're still causing the children of Abraham trouble. Well, eventually, God did give Sarah and Abraham a son named Isaac. Abraham was 100 years old. This was 25 years after he left left Mesopotamia for Canaan. Sarah was 90. They were as good as dead, both of them. It was a miracle child because this is a miracle nation. And about 20 years passed. Isaac is 20 years of age. God says, take your son Isaac and go offer him up as a sacrifice on Mount Moriah. Abraham went up to do that. And just as he was about ready to plunge the knife into his son Isaac, God said, stop. There's a ram caught in the thicket. Use that ram. And that was a remarkable moment in Abraham's life. He was a great man of faith. He knew and we read in Hebrews, he said, even if I kill him, I know God can raise him from the dead. And the story continues. Eventually Sarah dies. She's buried at the cave of Machpelah in Hebron, and then Abraham died. That's a brief history of Abraham. Now what we're going to do is look at his son Isaac. So in a sense, we got to go back a little bit before Abraham died. He and his wife Sarah had a son Isaac. Abraham's 100, Sarah is 90. And Isaac was their long-awaited son. 25 years had passed since they left Mesopotamia, and this was the precious, long-awaited son. Abraham saw his son grow to manhood, and when he was 40 years old, it was time for Isaac to be given a wife. Abraham looked around at the women in Canaan and did not want one of those women to be his son's wife. They were wicked, they were idolatrous, steeped in pagan idolatry. So God told Abraham, and I'm sure he probably prayed about it as well, because God was clearly in his move to send a servant back to Mesopotamia to find a wife for Canaan among his relatives there. And indeed, the Canaanites were terribly wicked. Eventually, God would have the Israelites destroy the Canaanites, but that's, 600 or 700 years in the future. Abraham sent a servant to Haran to find a wife for Isaac. Abraham wanted a wife for Isaac among his relatives. And if you recall what we just went through, when Abraham left Ur to go to Canaan originally, he took his family with him, took a detour toward Haran. And then God said, leave Haran, leave your family. And he left Haran. He did take one member of his family, but left a lot of others in Haran. So it's time for Isaac to be given a bride. And Abraham sends his servant back to Haran, to his family, to get a bride from among his family members. He did not want a bride from among the Canaanites. And we read about it in Genesis chapter 24. Abraham was now old and well advanced in years, and the Lord had blessed him in every way. He said to the chief servant of his household, the one in charge of all that he had, put your hand under my thigh. This is a way of taking a vow. Put a hand under my thigh. I want you to swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will not get a wife for my son from among the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I am now living, but will go to my country and my own relatives and get a wife for my son Isaac. The servant asked him, what if the woman is unwilling to come back with me to this land? Shall I then take your son back to the country you came from? Make sure that you do not take my son back there, Abraham said. He's finally learned his lesson. Don't go back to Mesopotamia. Now he's going to stay in Canaan. Make sure that you do not take my son back there, Abraham said. The Lord, the God of heaven, who brought me out of my father's household and my native land, and who spoke to me and promised me on oath, saying, to your offspring I will give this land, he will send his angel before you so that you can get a wife for my son from there. If the woman is unwilling to come back with you, then you will be released from this oath of mine. Only do not take my son back there. So the servant left Canaan and traveled to Haran, where Abraham had years earlier left members of his family, and apparently they were thriving there. The servant went back there to get a wife for Isaac. Abraham's servant knew that this would be difficult. I mean, he's going back. He doesn't know anything about Mesopotamia. He's going to go back to Haran. He knows they sort of live around. Which woman? And where's the family? It's not like he can go to the Yellow Pages. He can't Google them. So life was a little bit more difficult back then. So the servant is going to pray and ask for help. Not a bad idea, is it? Then the servant took 10 of his master's camels and left, taking with him all kinds of good things from his master. He set out for Aram Naharaim, that's northern Iraq, or northern Mesopotamia, the land around Haran, and made his way back to the town of Nahor, that's another name for Haran. He had the camels kneel near the well outside the town. It was toward evening, the time the women go out to draw water. Then he prayed, O Lord, God of my master Abraham, give me success today and show kindness to my master Abraham. See, I am standing beside this spring, and the daughters of the townspeople are coming out to draw water. May it be that when I say to a girl, please let down your jar that I may have a drink, that she says, drink, and I'll water your camels too. Incidentally, that was a big gesture. Those camels drank lots and lots and lots of water. So this wasn't just a nice, polite gesture. She was really extending herself. So, and she says, drink and I'll water your camels too. Let her be the one you have chosen for your servant Isaac. Good idea. Let God choose your spouse. Word to the wise. I hope you're praying for your children that God gives them good spouses. I know many of you are. By this I will know, he continues, that you have shown kindness to my master. Before he had finished praying, Rebekah came out with her jar on her shoulder. She was the daughter of Bethuel, son of Milcah, who was the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor. Family member right away. Purely accidental, of course. The girl was very beautiful, a virgin. No man had ever lain with her. She went down to the spring, filled her jar, and came up again. The servant hurried to meet her and said, please give me a little water from your jar. Drink, my lord, she said, and quickly lowered the jar to her hands and gave him a drink. After she had given him a drink, she said, I'll draw water for your camels too, until they have finished drinking. So she quickly emptied her jar into the trough, ran back to the well to draw more water, and drew enough for all the camels. She's clearly not a lazy woman. Good wife. Without saying a word, my wife isn't lazy either, so please don't think that I'm making any remark there. But I know some wives that are. I know some husbands who are, and that's sad. And those of you who are doing any counseling, it's pretty tough for a woman who has a husband that won't work. Or a poor guy that works all day, comes home, the dishes are all dirty, the house is dirty, and the wife is watching TV. You say, this doesn't happen? It happens all the time. She was a hard-working woman. We all have a responsibility to carry our weight in our homes. I know this may not sound real spiritual, but it's a responsibility. Anyway, enough of that. I'm in trouble already, I can see. Some of you women are frowning at me. Without saying a word, the man watched her closely to learn whether or not. We all try to make really super spiritual explanations for problems in homes. Now, sometimes there are spiritual problems, but sometimes it's just simple things like holding up your end of the deal. And guys, don't drop your socks on the bedroom floor. I know all about that. Without saying a word, the man watched her closely to learn whether or not the Lord had made his journey successful. When the camels had finished drinking, the man took out a gold nose ring weighing a beka, that's just several ounces, and 2 gold bracelets weighing 10 shekels. Then he asked, whose daughter are you? Please tell me, is there room in your father's house for us to spend the night? She answered him, I'm the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the son that Milcah bore to Nahor. And she added, we have plenty of straw and fodder, as well as room for you to spend the night. Then the man bowed down and worshiped the Lord, saying, praise be to the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not abandoned his kindness and faithfulness to my master. As for me, the Lord has led me on the journey to the house of my master's relatives. It's exactly where he wanted to go, all by accident. Abraham's servant, the big key is he asked God for help. And I'm not surprised. If I was going up there, I'd be asking for help too. So often we don't ask for help. And God clearly chose Rebekah to be Isaac's wife. There's no accident here. Abraham's servant immediately gave Rebekah valuable gifts. The family came to the well, invited the servant to their home, and before eating, the servant explained the reason for his visit. It's interesting. In the Middle East, it was customary to discuss your business after the meal. He was a man in a hurry. He was a man with a mission. He explained before eating why he came, and they all agreed that Rebekah could return to Canaan with the servant. But there was a snag. They wanted him to wait a few days, and he wanted to leave the next morning. And they tried to talk him into it, but he could not be dissuaded. And he was determined to go. He had a job to do, and he was going to get it done. Now, it's important to note at this point that this was no small agreement. Rebekah agreed to go with him, as well as her family. She was being asked to believe a man she had only just met. She was being asked to make her home in a land she had never visited. And she was being asked to marry a man she had never seen. What does that sound like? Sounds a little like us. We're asked to believe the Holy Spirit. We first get saved, we've never met. We're being asked to make our home in a land called heaven that we've never been to. And we're asked to marry a man named Jesus that we've never met. Isaac, he did take her back to Canaan. And we'll read about it in 24. We're reading through this because I want to give you a flavor of the text. Rebekah and her maid got ready and mounted their camels and went back with the man. So the servant took Rebekah and left. Now Isaac had come from Beer-lahai-roi, for he was living in the Negev. He went out to the field one evening to meditate, and as he looked up, he saw camels approaching. Rebekah also looked up and saw Isaac. She got down from her camel and asked the servant, "Who is that man in the field coming to meet us?" "He is my master," the servant answered. So she took her veil and covered herself. Then the servant told Isaac all he had done. Isaac brought her into the tent of his mother Sarah, and he married Rebekah. So she became his wife, and he loved her. And Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. Abraham and Isaac and Jacob are considered the three patriarchs of the Jewish people. Now, sometimes you read about Jacob's 12 sons being the patriarchs, but they're only patriarchs of the tribe. For example, Levi is the patriarch or father of the descendants of Levi. If you're a Levite, he was your patriarch. But there are only three men who are the patriarchs of all Jewish people: Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Isaac is a man who was often overshadowed by his father Abraham and by his son Jacob. And he was still quite a remarkable man, but the truth of the matter is he doesn't play as prominent a role in the Old Testament as did Abraham and Jacob. In fact, we'll be talking about Jacob shortly. He is in many ways a more interesting character and has I don't want to say he has a bigger role to play. It's just that we only have a record of the bigger role he played. One scholar wrote, "With Abraham dead, the scriptures now present Isaac as the center of interest. Isaac never matches his father either in personality or spirituality. Much less is said of him than either Abraham or Jacob. In fact, one comes to think of Isaac as either the son of Abraham or the father of Jacob, rather than as a person for himself." Nevertheless, he was a remarkable man, and keep this in mind: he submitted in Christ-like fashion to his father on Mount Moriah. We talked just a moment ago, we were sort of hurriedly going through that brief overview of the life of Abraham, that God told Abraham to go to Mount Moriah and offer up his son as a sacrifice. Well, keep in mind that when this took place, Abraham was about 120, and Isaac was 20. He was not a little boy. So often in the children's storybooks, you see him as a little 7 or 8-year-old. He was not. He was probably more like 20, maybe even a little older. In short, he was a full-grown man. Now, if he didn't want to go and get sacrificed, he wouldn't have gone. I mean, he did not have to go in the sense that he could have overpowered his father. but he submitted to his father. I don't know quite how his father presented it, but his father came and said, God has said that he wants me to take you to Mount Moriah and to sacrifice you there. And Isaac said, fine. There's no big argument here. And I find that quite remarkable. He had a faith that was similar to his father Abraham's. And he submitted in Christ-like fashion to his father at Mount Moriah, just as Jesus did. And he was a remarkable type of Christ. Last week we pointed out that the birth of Isaac foreshadowed the birth of Jesus. There were tremendous similarities. Both births were promised years before they occurred. Both births were greatly anticipated. Certainly Sarah and Abraham and Sarah looked forward to the birth of Isaac, as did the Jews for thousands of years. Both mothers found it difficult to believe in the promised births. When Jesus came, when God came to speak to Abraham and Sarah a year before Isaac was born, Sarah heard God, who came in a theophany as a man, telling Abraham he'd be there the next year and she'd have a baby. She laughed, remember? She said, I've been waiting all these years. I'm 89. I'm going to conceive. She was 90 when he was born. She found it difficult to believe, as did Mary. Mary says, I'm a virgin. Both mothers found it difficult to believe in the promised birth. Both boys were named before they were born. Isaac was named. They said, you'll name him Isaac. Why? Because both Abraham and Sarah laughed when God said, we're finally going to have this baby. So it's fine. We'll name him Isaac, which means laughter. And the angel who told Mary about the coming birth of Jesus, that she was to name him Jesus. Both births were miracle births. Both births occurred at the appointed time. And both births brought great joy. And the birth of Jesus is still bringing great joy. This is another way in which Isaac is a remarkable type of Christ. Now you understand these types. As you go through the pages of the Old Testament, you see Jesus on all these pages in a variety of ways. Sometimes it's prophecy, sometimes they're individuals or types of Christ, sometimes they're structures like the tabernacle. That's a magnificent picture of Jesus Christ. And there are ceremonies that are types of Christ. So in the case of Isaac, he was not only a type of Christ in that his birth foreshadowed the birth of Christ, his near sacrifice foreshadowed the sacrifice of Christ. To begin with, both men were obedient to the fathers even to the point of death. As pointed out a moment ago, Isaac was an adult, yet he yielded to his father. Jesus sweated blood, yet yielded to his father. Father, the night before he was crucified, prayed, if you are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but what? Yours be done. Both yielded to their fathers. Neither had to, both did. Both were offered as sacrifices within a few hundred yards of each other. Isaac was offered as a sacrifice on Mount Moriah, and Jesus was offered as a sacrifice on Mount Calvary, which just is outside the city gates of Moriah. And also, both were resurrected on the third day. Now, we all know about Jesus being resurrected on the third day, but many of you probably didn't realize that Isaac was resurrected on the third day. Let me explain why we know that to be the case. When God told Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac, Isaac was as good as dead. In fact, I'll read a passage from Hebrews in a moment that tells us that to be true. When Abraham was down in Beersheba, God says, Abraham, I want you to take your son Isaac to Mount Moriah, offer him as a sacrifice. He was as good as dead. 3 days later, they arrived at Mount Moriah. And at Mount Moriah, 3 days later, God says, stop, don't do it. And there's a very real sense he was raised from the dead. He received him back from the dead. Now, there's two scriptures that point to that. Hebrews 11. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. Abraham reasoned that God could raise the dead. And figuratively speaking, what? He did receive Isaac back from death. On the day he arrived at Moriah, and God put a stop to this almost sacrifice, Abraham, we're told in Hebrews, received his son back from the dead. In short, he was resurrected. But guess what day that was? The third day. God said, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you. Early the next morning, Abraham got up and saddled his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the third day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac, laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Keep in mind, this is a 20-year-old man. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. Here am I, he replied. Do not lay a hand on the boy, he said. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. And what did Hebrews say about it? By faith Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. Abraham reasoned that God could raise the dead, and figuratively speaking, he did receive Isaac back from the dead on what day? Third day. So they were both resurrected on the third day. So the near sacrifice of Isaac foreshadowed the sacrifice of Christ. Both were obedient to their fathers, even to the point of death. Both were offered as sacrifices within a few hundred yards of each other, and both were resurrected on the third day. Our brief history of Isaac. Isaac was the long-awaited son of Abraham and Sarah. He was 100 years old. She was 90. Abraham did not want Isaac to have a Canaanite bride. I can understand that. Abraham sent a servant to Haran to find a wife for Isaac. Abraham's servant asked God for help in finding Isaac's wife. Abraham's servant immediately gave Rebekah valuable gifts after she was pointed out to him by God. Abraham's servant wanted to leave the next morning, and he did. Isaac took Rebekah to be his wife. Abraham and Isaac and Jacob are the patriarchs of the Jewish people. All Jews are descended from these three men. A patriarch is a father. Isaac was overshadowed by Abraham and Jacob. Because they are more prominent figures in the scriptures. Isaac is a remarkable type of Christ. The birth of Isaac foreshadowed the birth of Christ. The near sacrifice of Isaac foreshadowed the sacrifice of Christ. Now, we're going to move from Abraham and Isaac to Jacob and Esau. The first great patriarch, Abraham, then Isaac, and then Isaac had two sons, Jacob and Esau. Abraham was 75 when God called him out of Mesopotamia. Abraham was 100 when Isaac was born. Isaac was 40 when he married Rebekah, and for 20 years, no kids. This delay in having kids is a real problem with this family. Isaac was 60 when Jacob and Esau were born, and we know that he prayed that God would open her womb and give him a child. Jacob and Esau are, well, let me rephrase that. Our concern is Abraham, Isaac, and whom? Less concerned with Esau. But you can't learn about Jacob without learning about Esau and their struggles, because much of his life was shaped by the struggles he had with his brother Esau. They struggled with each other to begin with while they were still in their mother's womb. They struggled at birth, and they struggled throughout their lives. They were the two brothers who did not get along. Let's read about it. Genesis 25. This is the account of Abraham's son Isaac. Abraham became the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel the Aramean from Paddan Aram, and sister of Laban the Aramean. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren. The Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. The babies jostled each other within her, and she said, "Why is this happening to me?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. The Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb. Now, the one nation, the nation of Jacob, is the nation of Israel. In fact, his name was changed to Israel, so the nation of Israel is named after one of the babies in her womb. Esau became the father of the Edomites. The Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. Now, this is sort of setting the stage of what's going to be taking next. The New American Standard Bible, rather than saying they jostled each other within her, it says the children struggled together within her. I like what the Living Bible says. I think they got it better. The children seemed to be fighting, and they just kept fighting. And then they not only struggled with each other when they were in their mother's womb, Jacob and Esau struggled with each other at birth. At birth. When time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. The first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment, so they named him Esau. Esau means red. After this, his brother came out with his hands grasping Esau's heel. Now, I laugh about this because this has characterized his whole life. Well, the next 50 years of his life. After this, his brother, this is Esau, came out with his hand grasping Esau's heel, so they named him Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah gave birth to them. Now, Jacob means supplanter. A supplanter is one that grabs hold of another's position by manipulation and deception. Now, you got to get the sense. The firstborn is big, big, big time in the Middle East. He's going to get the blessings. He's going to get the bulk of the family estate. And in the case of the Abraham, Isaac, Jacob family, the firstborn is the heir to the promise God made to Abraham. And that ain't a little promise, folks. That's gigantic. It's almost like, and I don't want to build too much into it, it's almost like Jacob wasn't happy with his arrangement. He's coming out second. And the first thing, even when he's coming out, Esau's in front of him. He's the heir. He's the guy that's going to get everything. And Jacob grabbing his heel, the supplanter. And it speaks of one who's tries to reach out and through deception and manipulation, grab hold of another's position. And that speaks of what's going to be taking place next. He wanted to be heir. So, Jacob and Esau struggled with each other while they were in the mother's womb. They struggled with each other at birth, which is why Jacob was named supplanter. He's one who grabs hold of another's position by manipulation and deception, and he will do just that. Jacob and Esau struggled with each other in life. To begin with, there was the moment when Jacob pushed Esau into selling his birthright. Most of you know the story. Esau is heir. He comes in, he's been out. He was a man who liked to hunt. He was out hunting wild game. He came in, he was hungry. Jacob liked to hang around the tents. He was cooking some stew, some red stew. And Esau came in and said, I'm famished. Give me a bowl of soup or stew. And Jacob said, only if you'll sell me your birthright. Well, I mean, that wasn't very nice. Hey, come on. But Esau said, who cares? I'm going to die if I don't eat, so what good is it anyway? I'll die. So he got this incredible birthright. You know what the birthright is? God said to Abraham, I'm going to make of you a great nation. I'm going to give you the land of Canaan. I'm going to bless the whole world through you. And we've talked about that. It's enormous. That was his. He sold it for a bowl of soup. Not smart. Not smart. But it wasn't good of Jacob either. Now, things continue on, and then one day, we've learned that Jacob cheated Esau out of his father's blessings. Now, let me explain what went on here. The birthright and the blessing are really a package. So Esau's really probably thought about it and thought, I probably didn't make a good deal, selling this incredible birthright for a bowl of stew. And it was a bad deal. But nevertheless, he wants more. And his father Isaac says to him one day, I'm ready to give you my blessing. Now, the birthright was that covenant God made with Abraham. His father's blessing was more temporal. It had to do with being wealthy and being blessed and that kind of thing. It's hard sometimes to understand the total distinction, but the birthright was the man with the birthright was heir to the Abrahamic covenant, and the father's blessing really should have been coupled with that. In fact, they really were. But Isaac liked Esau so much, he said, to heck with the uniting the birthright with the blessing. I want my son Esau to be blessed. I want him to be wealthy and to prosper and have lots of cattle. And so he said to his son Esau, I'll tell you what, son, go out and slay some wild game and then prepare it the way I like to eat it. And when you've done that, come into my tent and I will give you my blessing. So Esau goes out to do that. Rebekah's listening. And she doesn't like what she heard because she wants her favorite son, Jacob, to get the blessing. So she calls Jacob over and says, go kill 2 goats. I know how to make those goats taste like wild game. We'll fool your father. And we'll put on, he's half blind, see? He won't know who he's blessing. And we'll dress you up in some of Esau's robes. And Jacob says, yeah, but you know, my brother Esau is kind of a hairy guy. She said, that's not a problem. We'll take some of that goat skin and wrap it around your hands. He'll think it's you. He'll think that you are Esau. So they did it. And Jacob went into his father's tent, said, I'm Esau here to receive your blessing. And he gives him some of the goat meat that his mother had made to taste like the wild game. And Isaac blesses Jacob, thinking he's blessing Esau. Esau comes in, he ain't happy. He said, I've already lost my birthright, which is really his own fault. But now you steal my blessing. And then he mutters, as soon as my father's dead, I'm going to kill you. Rebekah hears this and says, you better leave. And so Jacob is going to go off and live with his uncle Laban, who's a bigger deceiver than he is. But that's God's plan to get rid of the larceny in Jacob. Now some of you are going to say, but why not just choose Esau? He was clearly nothing particularly dishonest about him. Let me make a few points. To begin with, all of the participants in this deception knew better. Isaac knew better. Isaac knew that God had declared Jacob to be the heir to the promise. Remember, while they were still in the mother's womb, God said to Rebekah, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you will be separated. 1 people will be stronger than the other. The old will serve the younger. In other words, he already knew that God had ordained the older Esau to serve the younger Jacob. Jacob knew that. Esau was his favorite, so he ignored it. Ignoring God's will is not a good thing. Isaac knew better. Esau knew better. Esau knew that when he sold his birthright, he sold his father's blessing. The two were a unit. When he sold his birthright, he sold the blessing. But you know what? He didn't care. He said, basically, I'll break my oath just to get my father's blessing. So Isaac knew better. Isaac knew that when those 2 boys were in their womb, God said, the older will serve the younger. The older will serve the younger. Esau will serve Jacob. Esau knew better. He knew when he sold his birthright, he sold the father's blessing, but he ignored it. And then Rebekah and Jacob knew better. Both knew that God had made Jacob the heir, but rather than letting God work it out righteously, they resorted to lies and deceptions. They knew that God had ordained that Jacob would be the greater, that Esau would be the lesser. They could have just stood back and said, do your thing, God. They weren't willing to wait on God, so they resorted to lies and deceptions, and the result was disastrous. The family was ripped apart. Esau made plans to kill Jacob. Jacob had to flee to Mesopotamia and his uncle Laban for 20 years, and for 20 years he was totally ripped off. And Rebekah probably never saw her favorite son again. She probably died, so she lost out in this deal too. They all knew better. They all knew they shouldn't have been doing what they were doing. Isaac knew that Jacob would be the heir to the throne. He didn't care. I'm going to bless Esau because he's my favorite. Esau knew that when he sold his birthright, he sold the blessing, but he didn't care. I'm going to cheat anyway. Rebekah and Jacob knew they had it won. Rather than letting God work it out in his own time, in his own way, they jumped the gun. 100 lessons there, right? Now, Jacob and Esau, let's just talk about them for a moment and we'll close. They had different natures and different destinies. Esau was a natural man. His destiny was outer darkness. He will spend eternity in the lake of fire. We know that clearly from the Word of God. Jacob was a spiritual man, and his destiny will be the presence of God, to which the average person says, are you kidding me? Jacob is the one who acted sinfully in taking advantage of Esau's his weakness when he came in from hunting. Esau was famished, he was hungry, and Jacob took advantage of him. He should have, the gracious and loving thing would have been, brother, have a bowl of soup. No, I'll let you die, I'll let you starve first. Sell me your birthright. Not nice. He acted sinfully and taking advantage of Esau's weakness. And then he conspired with his mother Rebekah to steal Esau's blessing. So how are you saying Jacob was a spiritual man whose destiny is the presence of God, and Esau a natural man whose destiny is outer darkness? Why the difference? Well, we're going to see the story of these two men is not finished here, especially the story of Jacob, because we're going to be talking a lot more about Esau, but we'll be talking a lot more about Jacob. See, God saw something in both these men that isn't evident right now. God saw their hearts, and he saw something in their hearts that made him love Jacob and hate Esau. And he tells us that in both the Old Testament and the New Testament. Jacob I loved, Esau I've hated. To which you say, but Jacob was the sinfully wretched, deceiving, manipulative jerk. Jacob is the one I loved, Esau is the one I've hated. Let's think about that for a moment. God saw Jacob. Let me tell you what God saw in Jacob. God saw that Jacob understood what was truly valuable. This is a key. God saw that even though Jacob was deceptive and manipulative, Jacob understood the value of the things of God. Jacob understood the value of spiritual blessings. Jacob understood the value of eternal blessings. Jacob understood the value of the Abrahamic covenant. He understood the value of being the one through whom God would fulfill this promise. That promise, in a certain sense, didn't put food on the table. That promise would be hundreds, thousands of years in the future before it was fulfilled. He saw that as valuable. That was something from God that he said is incredible. God is going to bless the world through the heir of the promise he made to Abraham. I want that. I want that. Esau couldn't have cared less. He saw Jacob, even though he was manipulative and deceptive, he saw real value in the things of God. Jacob understood that the greatest blessings this world have to offer are spiritual blessings from the Lord. In fact, he saw them as being so valuable that he was willing to lie and cheat and steal to get them, which wasn't the right way to get them. Don't misunderstand. We're not going to excuse that. Nevertheless, he saw where real value lay. I live in a world, you live in a world, filled with people who don't see anything valuable in spiritual things. You ever notice? Right after I got saved, I went and told all my friends about Jesus. And many of you had the same experience. They looked at me like, it's nice for you, David, but pass the beers. My friends mostly just wanted a refrigerator full of beer, good comfortable chair, some chips, and a sports channel. I said, but there's this great eternity out there, and your life can count for something, and there's God, and who cares? Who's playing this weekend at Yankee Stadium? You understand the point I'm trying to get at? The world is filled with people who have no sense of what God's values are, no sense of spiritual blessings, no sense of righteousness. So Jacob saw that Jacob understood the value of the things of God. Jacob understood the value of spiritual blessings, of eternal blessings. And he saw the incredible value of the Abrahamic covenant of being the one through whom God would fulfill this promise. He understood that the real value of this world are the things of God. They're spiritual. God saw that Esau did not understand what was truly valuable. Esau did not care about the things of God. Esau did not care about spiritual issues. Esau did not care about eternal issues. Esau did not care about the Abrahamic covenant. Esau was on the track to be one of the three patriarchs of the Jewish nation and didn't care. We would be talking today about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and who cares? Where are the chips? Where's the beer? Another? Who's playing Yankee Stadium now? Can you get this? I mean, this is significant, folks. And this gives you a key to recognizing God's Hall of Fame. As you look through the Bible, or we go over to Hebrews 11, I talk about it a lot because it struck me, it thunderstruck me years ago. You look at that Hall of Fame, all those guys were terribly flawed, but they had one thing in common. They really appreciated God. Samson couldn't stay out of the beds of those Philistine women. Let's face it. He was a Hugh Hefner among the judges. He was. We soft pedal it, but it's true. It's true, and he knew exactly what he was doing. But you know what? He still had a passion for God, flaws and all. Look at David, flaw, flaw, flaw. Abraham, flaw, flaw, flaw. Look at all of them, flaw, flaw, flaw. But the ones what separated them from the rest of them was they genuinely appreciated the things of God. That's encouraging. When Satan whispers in your ear and says, oh, you blew it there, and you blew it there, and you blew it there, you can say, wait a minute, though, but you know what my virtue is? I really do appreciate the things of God. That helps us understand. Esau was in many ways the gentleman here, was he not? Did he do any deceiving? He didn't deceive Jacob. And he wasn't a materialist, obviously. He was willing to sell his birthright for a bowl of soup. God looked at it and said, I find that disgusting. Esau was on track to be one of the three patriarchs of the Jewish nation, but he didn't care. Esau would have been called, God would have called himself the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Esau. But Esau didn't care. Esau tossed away this greatest of honors for a bowl of red stew. And actually, the translators were very nice in calling it red stew. The real translation of the passage, when Esau came into the tent where Jacob was cooking the red stew, the real translation is red stuff. I'll sell my birthright for some of that red stuff over there. Just give me some of that red stuff. You understand what he threw away for some red stuff? I want you to get the flavor of how vile this was. This was a heritage that's so magnificent, there aren't words to describe. Can you imagine, Carmen, God saying, I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Carmen? You say, well, I didn't put any food on my table. Hello, Esau. Hello, Esau. Who cares, man? Does that make me richer? Does that give me increase the value of my 401k? No. Can you imagine? What if it was God saying, I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Stephen? Would you consider it an honor? Oh, cut my legs off. What an honor. Jacob saw it. Esau didn't. Now you get a sense of these two men? Jacob was the deceiver, the manipulator, the liar. But he understood true value. Esau never did. Just never did. Esau tossed away the greatest of honors from some red stuff. No wonder God said in Malachi, Jacob I have loved, but Esau what? In Romans 9, in case you didn't get it. Hey out there, in case you didn't get it. Jacob I love, but Esau I've hated. Now, what's interesting is you go through the histories, and Esau from a human point of view seems to be the gentleman. Incidentally, after 20 years living in Haran, Jacob comes back, and Esau's totally forgiven him, holds no grudge, which is very virtuous character. From a human point of view, if I went into business, I wouldn't go into business with Jacob. It'd been Esau, at least during that early portions of their lives. But the difference was this. God saw in Jacob's heart a man who genuinely appreciated spiritual values, things of God. And Esau was a man who just didn't care about God or the things of God. Jacob and Esau struggled with each other while they were in their mother's wombs. Jacob and Esau struggled with each other at birth. Jacob and Esau struggled with each other in life. All of the participants in the deception knew better. Jacob and Esau had different natures and different destinies. Esau was a natural man. He had no use for the things of God, and his destiny as a result will be outer darkness. Jacob, on the other hand, was a spiritual man. He understood spiritual values. His destiny will be the presence of God. But God has some work to do on him. He did have appreciation of spiritual values as opposed to Esau. He appreciated that Abrahamic covenant. But God is not happy about his deceiving, manipulative character. And what God is going to do is send him to live with his uncle Laban for 20 years. He's going to meet more than his match. And he's going to come back from his 20 years with Uncle Laban saying, I hate deception, and I hate manipulation, and I hate lying. That's sort of what God does with us. If you watched your progress, if you've been walking with the Lord at all, if you really care about spiritual things, if you don't care about spiritual things, I don't know what to say to you. But if you genuinely care about spiritual things, you've looked at how God has worked in your life, you'll see that God is chipping away at the garbage. At the garbage. I love what one man asked a sculptor who was about ready to tackle a great block of marble and make of that great block of marble a statue of a horse. And this fellow asked him, he says, how are you going to make a statue of a horse from this great block of marble? And the sculptor said, I'm going to chip away everything that doesn't belong to a horse. So simple. But you know what? That's what God does with us, doesn't it? And that's what he's about to do with Jacob. He's going to chip away everything that doesn't belong to a man of God. But you started with something good. You started with a man who genuinely appreciated the things of God. Unlike his brother, who was in many ways a gentleman, but just wanted an easy chair, some chips, and a refrigerator full of beer. Jacob said, no, I want the things of God. Unfortunately, early on in his life, he went at them the wrong way. But God saw that he appreciated true value, and he started chipping away at those things that don't belong to a man of God. And we'll pick up with that next. Father, we love you. We worship you. We thank you for being our God and loving us. And we thank you for your many blessings to us. We thank you for the stories you've given us, these great men. And I pray, Lord, that we can learn about them, learn from them how we should live our lives and live them better. Bless our time together again next week. In Jesus' name we pray.